Back when I built the JC Fund framework, I put a number and a date on the wall. A 140,000 Singapore dollars structural dividend floor by July 2027. That date was meant to be the finish line. Something far enough away that I could actually hit it, close enough that it forced discipline. But this month, July 2026, the sale of Property 1, one of our 2 investment properties, is closing. And that single event just dragged my finish line a full year forward, whether I was ready for it or not. So today, I'm not doing a motivational update. I'm not doing a here's how compounding works video. I'm doing something scarier. I'm opening the actual spreadsheet, plugging in the real numbers as they stand this month, and asking the only question that matters. Have I actually achieved financial independence? Not, am I rich? Not, does my net worth look good on a slide? The one question that determines whether I could walk away from my job tomorrow and the household still functions. Does my passive income cover every dollar expenses I'd still have, with something left over? I'll tell you now. The answer is not a clean yes. It's not a clean no either. It's something much thinner, much more interesting, and much more honest than either of those. Let's get into the numbers. Let me ground you in where things actually stand. As of this year, our household net worth sits at 6,125,456 Singapore dollars. That's spread across the JC Fund portfolio, 24 positions across Singapore, US, Hong Kong, and Australian dollar exposure, worth around 4 million Singapore dollars, 2 properties, and CPF balances for both Mrs. and me. The portfolio throws off about 145,000 Singapore dollars a year in dividends. That a 3.65% yield, decent, but not spectacular, and it's the single most important number in this entire video, because everything downstream depends on it. On the expense side, our household lifestyle costs run about 80,000 Singapore dollars a year. On top of that sits a much heavier bucket, 209,823 Singapore dollars a year. That covers income tax, our own rent, and the mortgages, MCSD fees, and property tax on both properties. Here's the thing about that heavier bucket. Most of it is not permanent. It exists because I'm still employed and we're still renting. The moment both of those things change, a huge chunk of that 209,823 Singapore dollars simply evaporates. And this month, one of the 2 triggers for that evaporation is happening. Property 1 was always the investment property, never the one we plan to live in. Property 2 is the one Mrs., and I move into once we pull the trigger. So Property 1 was always going to be sold. The only question was when. The sale price came in at 1,725,000 Singapore dollars. Against that, we owe 979,478 Singapore dollars on the mortgage. Agent commission at 1.8% takes another 31,050 Singapore dollars, and legal and miscellaneous fees add roughly 3,000 Singapore dollars. Net sale proceeds, 711,472 Singapore dollars. Then there's a piece people often forget, the CPF refund. Whatever CPF money was used to service that property, principal plus accrued interest, has to go back into my CPF ordinary account. It's not spendable cash. In my case, that's an estimated 55,731 Singapore dollars flowing back into CPF, not into my bank account. So the actual cash I have to deploy, the number that matters for this video, is 655,741 Singapore dollars. Now here's the part one actually want to sit with for a second. We bought Property 1 well below this price. The capital gain on this sale is 291,812 Singapore dollars. And because Singapore has no capital gains tax for individuals, that entire gain is ours. Net worth improvement from this single transaction, plus 257,762 Singapore dollars. That's a genuinely good outcome. But a good sale doesn't automatically mean FI. What matters is what happens to that 655,741 Singapore dollar next. I'm not touching this money for lifestyle. It has a job to do. First, 200,000 Singapore dollars gets ring-fenced immediately into the education fund for our 2 kids. That's non-negotiable. It happens before a single dollar goes anywhere else. The remaining 455,741 Singapore dollars gets deployed into the JC fund portfolio at our target yield of 4.5%. That single move adds approximately 20,508 Singapore dollars a year in fresh dividend income. That 20,508 Singapore dollars is not a footnote. As you're about to see, it's the difference between technically achieving FI this year and falling short of it. Here's where we stop talking about net worth and start talking about the only metric that actually determines FI. Does passive income cover post-FI expenses? Let's build the post-FI income side first. Base portfolio dividends, 145,000 Singapore dollars, plus the incremental 20,508 Singapore dollars from deploying the Property 1 proceeds. Rental income from the portfolio contributes zero. Property 1 is sold, and Property 2 becomes our own home, not a rental. Total post-FI passive income, 165,508 Singapore dollars a year. Now the expense side, and this is where a lot of FI math goes wrong, because people forget what actually disappears the day you stop working. Income tax gone. That's 28,179 Singapore dollars a year. That only exists because of employment income. Our own rent is gone. That's 51,600 Singapore dollars a year. That disappears the moment we move into Property 2, which was always a plan for our FI date. What remains is a Property 2 mortgage, 73,157 Singapore dollars a year, plus MCSD, property tax, and insurance on that one property, roughly 9,998 Singapore dollars a year. Call it 83,155 Singapore dollars a year in pure housing cost, plus our 80,000 Singapore dollar household lifestyle budget. Total post-FI expenses, 163,155 Singapore dollars a year. So, 165,508 Singapore dollars in income against 163,155 Singapore dollars in expenses. The surplus is 2,353 Singapore dollars a year. That's 196 Singapore dollars a month. Coverage ratio, 101.4%. That number, 101.4%, is technically a pass. It means, on paper, for the first time, our passive income fully covers our post-FI cost of living, with a hair of margin left over. A year ahead of the July 2027 target, I set myself, but 196 Singapore dollars a month of slack on a household spending over 160,000 Singapore dollars a year is not a comfortable cushion. It's a rounding error. And that changes how I want you to interpret everything that follows. Here's the stress test I run every single time, because dividend income is the one number in this whole model that isn't guaranteed. If total dividend income comes in at 130,000 Singapore dollars, we're at 79.7% coverage, a real deficit of over 33,000 Singapore dollars a year. At 145,000 Singapore dollars, we're at 88.9%, still short. It's only once total dividend income clears roughly 163,000 Singapore dollars that coverage crosses 100%. Below that line, at 155,000 Singapore dollars, we're still at 95%, a 8,155 Singapore dollar shortfall. Above it, at 175,000 Singapore dollars, coverage climbs to 107.3% and the cushion starts to feel real. Our actual position, 165,508 Singapore dollars, sits just barely on the right side of that line. Now here's the risk that keeps me honest. Currency. Roughly 84% of the JC fund's exposure sits in USD and HKD denominated assets. The Singapore dollar has been strengthening against both this year. A move of just 5% in SGD's favor erases about 3,000 Singapore dollars a year in dividend income once translated back to SGD. Do that math against our 2,353 Singapore dollar annual surplus, and a single plausible currency move flips this entire result from a thin surplus into an outright deficit. That's not a hypothetical designed to scare you. That's the actual fragility sitting underneath a 101.4% coverage headline. I'd rather show you the crack than hide behind a round number. Zooming back out to net worth for a second. after Property 1 sale settles. Household net worth moves from 6,125,456 Singapore dollars to approximately 6,383,218 Singapore dollars. None of that number is part of my FI math. Net worth doesn't pay the bills, cash flow does. But it matters as the backstop underneath everything. The clearest piece of that backstop is CPF. Combined, Mrs. and I hold 483,878 Singapore dollars in our CPF special accounts, compounding at a guaranteed 4% a year, untouchable until we turn 55, 11 years from now. By then, that pool alone should be worth roughly 745,000 Singapore dollars, quietly building a second retirement income floor completely independent of the JC Fund's dividend performance. We also have a combined 129,295 Singapore dollar sitting in our CPF ordinary accounts, which can be used to service the Property 2 mortgage directly, freeing up cash flow from our investment income without touching a single share. I don't count either of these in the coverage ratio I just showed you because they're locked and illiquid today, but they're real, and they matter for anyone doing this math about their own life. Your FI number today should stand on its own 2 feet, with the CPF or pension backstop as a bonus, not a crutch. Because a 196 Singapore dollars a month surplus isn't something I want to bet a family's financial future on. Here are the levers available to widen that gap, ranked by impact. Lever 1, already executed, selling Property 1 and deploying the proceeds. That's the 20,508 Singapore dollars a year we already counted. Lever 2, 1 more year of employment, deploying roughly 331,324 Singapore dollars in additional annual savings at 4.5% adds another 14,910 Singapore dollars a year in dividend income. Lever 3, and the one I find most interesting, recycling 3 underperforming growth positions, Euronet, StoneCo, and Matewan, worth about 252,090 Singapore dollars combined and currently generating close to zero income. Moving that capital into yield-bearing positions at 4.5% adds 11,344 Singapore dollars a year, and on its own would push coverage from 101.4% up to roughly 108.4%. Lever 4, prepaying part of the Property 2 mortgage to permanently reduce that 73,157 Singapore dollars a year burden. The exact benefit depends on how much principal we apply. Lever 5, routing CPF ordinary account funds to offset the Property 2 mortgage payment directly, which could free up somewhere between 6,000 Singapore dollars and 12,000 Singapore dollars a year in cash without selling a single position. Any one of these, especially Lever 3, turns barely pass into comfortably pass. None of them require heroics. That's the point. So let me give you the verdict straight, the same way I'd write it in an actual investment memo. Status: technically FI, thin margin. Coverage ratio 101.4%. Monthly surplus 196 Singapore dollars. This is a year ahead of the July 2027 target I committed to publicly on this channel. The single biggest risk that could flip this into a deficit, FX. Specifically, continued SGD strength against the US dollar and Hong Kong dollar, which make up 84% of the portfolio's currency exposure. The single highest leverage move to fix that, recycling the 3 deadweight growth positions into income assets, which alone would take coverage from 101% to roughly 108%. A real cushion instead of a rounding error. I want to be precise about what this verdict does and doesn't mean. It does not mean I'm resigning next week. It means the machine, for the first time on paper under real numbers a year ahead of schedule, technically works. It also means the machine has zero room for error in its current state, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest to you and reckless for my own family. Financial independence was never going to arrive as a clean, dramatic finish line. It arrived exactly like this. A spreadsheet crossing 100% by a hair, on the same month the property sale happened to close, with a currency risk sitting quietly underneath it that I need managed before I trust this number with my family's future. So here's what actually changes starting this month. I'm not walking into my boss's office tomorrow. Hitting the number a year early doesn't mean rushing the exit. It means I now have a year of runway I didn't expect, and I intend to spend it widening the margin, not testing it. That means recycling Euronet, StoneCo, and Mate1 into yield positions. It means letting the CPF special account keep compounding untouched. And it means running this exact check again, quarter by quarter, all the way to July 2027, and showing you the real numbers every time, including the quarters where the coverage ratio drops back under 100%. Because it probably will. That's the deal I'm making with this channel. No polished victory laps. Just the actual spreadsheet every time. If you're running your own FI numbers, tell me in the comments, what's your coverage ratio right now? And what's the one lever sitting closest to your hand that you haven't pulled yet? Subscribe if you want to keep following the JC Funds journey to July 2027. New numbers, same honesty every time. I'll see you in the next one.